Hello, and welcome to this CSU Writes webinar on thesis and dissertation writing tips on how to get started and stay inspired. I'm Christina Quinn, the director of CSU Writes, and this is a re-recording of a session that we did earlier. There was a lot of conversation, and it just seemed better to re-record something that doesn't have people's voices and sharing out of information. So, and you'll see why when we get to the reflections in a moment. But just kind of a heads up on how this is being framed. I'm going to talk about writing using kind of three areas and primary metaphors. One is climbing and kind of hanging on to the edge. The Red Queen hypothesis, this metaphor for moving very quickly but feeling like you're staying in the same place. And a Klein bottle, which appears to be a two-dimension kind of object, but really has a single dimension, a single surface. So these are really nice metaphors, I think, for talking about writing, because writing tips can often come across as like, eat well, get your exercise, get enough sleep, but they're not very fun. And so this is going to be somewhere in between. We're going to talk about thesis and dissertation writing in ways that are enjoyable and I hope land well with you, get you feeling inspired and looking forward to making momentum and building out progress on your project. So there are three far-reaching claims that I'm going to make during this webinar. One is that we learn what our thesis and dissertation is by writing the thesis or dissertation. So we understand it better, our project, but also just the nature of a thesis or dissertation by actively engaging with it repeatedly. Who you are in relation to your writing project matters. And that writing a thesis or dissertation generates the very inspiration that you need to write a thesis or dissertation. So we'll talk about how all of these operate. Moment of reflection. It's helpful when we start off with any kind of consideration of who we are in the relation to the work that we do, that we actually stop and take a moment for reflection and see who we are in relation to the work that we're doing. So the first four that we will reflect on, and there are 6 total for the webinar, we'll do 4 up front and 2 towards the end of the session. But the first is briefly describe your research project. Just topic and your field should be enough to kind of get you thinking about what it is that you do. What do you enjoy most about that project? And then we're going to shift it to writing and just writing challenges because they're not the same as your project, right? But thinking about where it is that writing fits perhaps in that relationship to your project is helpful. And then listing words that describe how you feel about writing a thesis or dissertation. Just a handful. Just take a moment and pause. After your pause, we did a share out, but just, know that you can think about it as we move through what your responses were. When we define a thesis and dissertation, that very last question that I asked about words to describe how you feel about working on it. Oftentimes, we're getting to understand what a thesis and dissertation is by working with others, with our committee, with peer colleagues and graduate students in our departments. And we learn kind of by doing, but these are ancient forms. A thesis is a meaning of to place. It's a proposition that we make. It can be an arranging or a setting down of something, an argument. Perhaps. Dissertation, also ancient term, ancient form, to examine, discuss, and continue to discuss. Notice that thesis and dissertation in these ancient forms, not exactly what we're talking about when what you're going to be submitting formally to the graduate school for completion of your degree, right? So the form of it, there's the act of it, and then there's the form of it. And so maybe additional definitions will help. I love this one from Wikipedia. that generally speaking, a dissertation is judged as whether or not it makes an original and unique contribution to scholarship. Lesser projects, a master's thesis, for example, are judged by whether or not they demonstrate mastery of available scholarship and the presentation of an idea. And my favorite part is that it's dubious and that we need to discuss, which is like the dissertation, right? To continue to discuss. There's some good general kind of breakdown here to think about, like, smaller projects versus larger projects, and maybe kind of demonstrating mastery over some concepts in the field versus doing original research. Those lines aren't always so clear, and so it may be that you're doing a master's degree where you're writing a thesis that does include original research that you will then publish as an article. And it may be that you're writing a dissertation that makes a unique contribution, but ultimately that you're going to pull apart in various ways and build off of differently and not publish as articles, and that the contributions to scholarship will be in pedagogy or other things. So there's any number of ways that that definition is dubious. What we do have that's clear guidance that is just set, that we know exists to kind of hold us in check with our theses and dissertations, is that there's a checklist, an electronic thesis and dissertation submission checklist, that we have formatting guides, we have formatting tips, we have sample pages, open labs, submission guides, copyright, and publishing information. So there's kind of guidelines, but that's not exactly, those are for everyone, and they aren't specific to you and the work that you're doing with your own thesis or dissertation. So it really helps for you to get to know writing broadly and to think about it as not just that thesis or the dissertation, which is the product, the end product, right? Specialized knowledge, field specific, but it's also the process. Think about writing as the process by which you are putting together that thesis or that dissertation, what it's going to contain, kind of the elements and what comes first and what comes next. It's also writing is the practice by which you will engage with that regularly. It's broadly your project. So when we asked about your project and thinking about that, it could be anything that's moving that research forward, task-based. It could be reading, it could be analysis that you're bringing forward to work on it. And writing is also your persona. It's who you are in relation to others. So for those of you who are working on scientific teams, you know that who your professional persona, your writing persona matters. It's also your voice on the page and how it is that you're shaping we as a team, perhaps, or I and maybe positionality in terms of your research. We also know that writing has carries with it internal and external pressures that come to bear and affect all of those prior product, process, practice, project, and persona elements. And so thinking about all of the pressures that are going to be facing you in relationship to your thesis and dissertation as you move it through, just know that there are resources and all kinds of support there. And some of those pressures are really good, right? Like deadlines work. Deadline, that external pressure to when are you going to get it done? All right. My first claim that I want to give you is that you won't fully understand a thesis or dissertation until you've written it. So that means that it'll be specific to your field, suit your committee's vision and preferences, and in the end, it'll meet graduate school specifications. Keep that in mind. This is not, doesn't have to be the end all be all. It doesn't have to be the perfect document. It really has to meet these kinds of criteria. And ultimately, you'll learn by doing it. The Klein bottle, that second metaphor, or the last metaphor, excuse me, that was on that list, it doesn't have an edge, right? So it's a boundary-free form, one-sided object. And the idea is that an ant can walk along its surface and never kind of cross its own path, crossing its boundary, excuse me. And there are a set of equations that define the surface of a Klein bottle. And this is my joke for the mathematicians. But if you are interested in making a Mobius strip, you could make one by taking a slice of paper and turning it over and sticking the sides together and just watch and see how they kind of move one side to the other. And that really is how it is that I think we work with our reading and our writing. They're one and the same. Writing a thesis or dissertation, it requires so many different components that just become fluid. They're part of that writing process and practice, reading and writing, for example. For now, we've got AI with not a lot of guidelines or standards for how it is that we are told that we can use it in our work. And so I want to make sure that we just address it briefly. You will want to make sure that you are within the guidelines of CSU and academic integrity. You're talking openly with your committee members and folks on how it is that you are using any AI within your writing. And so how it is that you can get kind of a compass, a guideline when there aren't a lot of standards already in place for us to follow, or to look to the institution and see what are the requirements there, just to make sure that you know. If you are writing grant proposals or on grants, you also want to check with the funding agencies and make sure that you're also working with their guidelines. Your professional associations, for example, National Academies of Science has some great codes of conduct. National Science and Technology Council and Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. Those are professional associations that would have anything to do with you. For example, those are just examples, but check with your professional associations because all of those have guidelines. And publishers. Increasingly, publishers are kind of adjusting and changing their guidelines to be able to suit publication needs in the era of AI. So look to your publishers because they are changing, but most are saying that AI cannot be used. I don't know actually a publisher who is saying that AI can be used as a co-author. You can be using it for review as long as there's a final human review, for example. But they all have their kind of idiosyncratic kind of requirements. So just check through and make sure that you understand what those AI requirements are. I mentioned AI because it's part of your resources. And when you're getting started, you want to be able to marshal resources. You want to make sure that you know kind of how you can get information about AI and how you might use it if you have that inclination or if you want to, right? But again, identifying those basic requirements for your thesis and dissertation. Seek out models so you can understand how it is what you're putting together relates to other models in your field or dissertations or theses by your advisor, by students that who've gone through and worked with your advisor in the past. It's helpful if you're honest with yourself about the challenges and the pleasures of writing. Drudgery tales, you don't need to tell them to yourself all the time. It's hard work. And those challenges, when you overcome, they can feel really good. And I think that because we're challenged, that's the great pleasure of writing our thesis and dissertation often. Identify as a writer who works on a project regularly. That'll be so helpful for you as you move through. And theses and dissertations, it's just also good for you to remember that these are highly structured, kind of contextualized genres of writing, and that they are not naturally the way that many of us, anyway, think. So that structure can vary from field to field, and you may be transitioning from one field to another, for example, from one discipline to another, and find that you are writing in a very different way, in a different mode. You may find that even by working with a different advisor or on a different type of project, that you will be moving to a new mode or new way of writing. So structures can vary, and so it's helpful to have those models. They require skillful negotiation between field and university, department, committee, advisor expectations. So you will be filtering. They require at the same time that you're putting together this highly structured document that you be filtering through and making decisions based on feedback from many different places. They cannot be written in a single binge writing session for as much as we would long to. And they can actually take quite some time, a year or more, for you to understand the point of what it is that you are writing and why you're writing it. And they force us repeatedly to confront the limits of what it is that we know, of our arguments, of our confidence. So as you test those limits, just know that's a place of strength because it's very much like exercise or making sure that kind of building muscle, right? Because you are pushing the limit and then you're backing off a bit and resting, and then you can go a little bit further the next time, oftentimes with exercise and training, right? Graduate school, with its extensive research and academic projects, can feel a little bit like you're hanging on, yep, by the cliff's face. This is where we get to the climbing metaphors. This is Chris Sharma, American climber. And I think he's most well known, you can look him up for being one of the strongest and flexible climbers in the world, for doing some visionary ascents, for climbing seemingly impossible routes and showing us that it can be done. That's a level of expertise that, right, we can aspire to, and as a metaphor, we can aspire to be Sharmas in our own way, in our own fields, right? What he's less well known for is skillful marshaling of resources. And I think for a lot of successful athletes, American climbers, they marshal resources really, really well. And Al Connell, he's another kind of a good example, and we'll come back to these metaphors in a bit, but he's most well known for free soloing El Capitan in Yosemite, and for the movie about his kind of passion for climbing and free solo. And just take a moment and thinking about hanging onto that cliffside and your dissertation project and the metaphor that we're creating here. And if we consider Sharma and Honnold's relationship to that cliff's edge, I think we find the very things that drew them to the rock face, its degree of difficulty, the personal challenge, the daily training, for example, the pleasure of the climb, can be analogous to thesis and dissertation writing. Yeah. So you can think about the challenges that you face, and what the challenges are that draw you perhaps to that particular climb. What is it in that thesis or dissertation that you really kind of challenges you and you want to rise to meet that? And just a reminder about the process, getting good with the climb being the climb, the writing of the thesis and the dissertation is just the writing of the thesis and dissertation. Because writing is a site of purposeful practice, right? Where we develop field-specific skills, knowledge, we build our professional identities actually as well, and we make incremental but valuable contributions to a field of study. This metaphor aligns well with work done in psychology on the development of expertise, and Anders Ericsson is the expert on how it is that people become experts. And his peak performance book, you could take a look at it. It's easily accessible. You can find it copies online, or if you'd like to have a copy, I actually have some extras, so please reach out. But his work on deliberate practice shares with us that you kind of push hard, and then you kind of have a moment where you kind of relax and kind of reflect on what it is that you've learned, and then you push hard again. And you need to have feedback, you need to have guidance. So the relationship that you have with your advisors, with your committee, with other people, experts in the field, with colleagues who can give you some feedback on your writing and the work that you're doing, all of that is necessary. Sometimes it's hard to hear, but it's all necessary as long as it's healthful and supportive for you. It can still be difficult, but it's important to have as part of a deliberate practice where you're growing and changing. Because that writing feedback is essential. Ask for feedback from readers early on. Have conversations with peers, advisors, field experts regularly. Identify patterns in your writing that require kind of, or suggest that there's kind of consistent challenges that you face in structuring your sentences, for example, or your ideas, or gaps in your writing where you ask the reader to make huge leaps in the logic. And so look for those kinds of patterns in the feedback that you're getting and see how it is that you can begin to learn some skills and kind of build your writing skills as you're working through by tracking errors, for example, and then seeking out solutions that help you define terms that you don't know, and grammar guides and models. And it allows for you also to practice in new writing forms and new styles. So pay attention to that as you're reading in your field, particularly for your literature review. Who's writing in ways that you really, really like, that you'd want to model? The benefits of writing a thesis or dissertation are extensive. You get to develop skills and understanding of the field, right, broadly, and then very specifically. And that's how you develop expertise, right, through that process. And being able to develop that mastery, consider the time commitment to expertise in a field. It's not something that you get immediately. It takes a long time to build those skills. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a little Sharma climbing the rock face there. And just remember that you are not alone. You are part of a specialized and specializing, continually changing community that has a great set of support systems, right? People who are on the rock face with you, helping support that climb. whatever it is you're doing. You've got advisors, you've got peers, you've got support, you've got CSU Writes, right? You've got people who are here to support you. My second claim, right? Who you think you are in relation to your writing project matters. So this is our question number 4 in thinking about the words that we use to describe our project. And not sure what your words were, but just think about that. And we're going to talk about reframing and seeing about using those words so they can help inspire us so that we can breathe some, reframe them if we need to, use them to inspire the work that we're doing. Um, Inspiration is tricky because usually it's seen as coming from the outside rather than from the inside. So it's in part because it comes from notions of breathing into and it connects to ideas of the divine. And we often get into a bind, I think, when we wait to be inspired. If you're one of those writers who's like, well, I won't write today, I'll just wait until I'm inspired. It's usually not inspiration that's from the external, it's usually looming deadlines or urgency and pressures that will encourage you to write. It could also be that you've been waiting to kind of work through and conceptually and think through or read enough or have enough conversation. And that's something also very different. It's not about being inspired, then it's about being able to sit with ideas long enough to be able to write about them. I think if we wait to be inspired and we expect it to feel somehow, fabulous, and then we're going to start writing, it's unlikely that you're going to feel like this sitting down to write, right? That's just yeah, unrealistic. So my recommendation is pull together your tools, pull together your resources. You may have some notion of using AI when you sit down to write, and that's fine. That's great. Just be clear at what stage you're including it and track how it is that you're using it. Um, I'll include a crosswalk for if you, and I guess if you're attending this as a webinar, you need to email me, but just email and we have access to, can give you access to a crosswalk for professional development for AI use and thinking about how is it strategically that you're going to be marshaling this resource to be able to get started, right? Because I think there's a lot of our writing that feels, because our expectations and pressures on it, not very inspiring, but more like we are continually running very quickly to be able to move very little, right? The Red Queen hypothesis comes from evolutionary biologist Van Valen's hypothesis that organisms must constantly adapt, evolve, and proliferate to reproduce and survive in an ever-changing environment. And we have a rapidly changing environment, and we must do the work that we do and contribute in our ways, and then be able to find ways to find that satisfying and work through those pressures. Um, so some of the best work out there, I think that is helpful for working through the pressures of writing is in developing a relationship with the work that we do. And so, as I mentioned, the the relationship that you have with your own writing, with yourself as a writer, is crucial. So there's some great resources out there. Some of them come from cognitive behavioral therapy. David Burns, like feeling good early on. He says, if you're waiting for inspiration to go and do the dishes in the sink, he's like, you're unlikely to do the dishes in the sink, right? Nobody gets inspired to do that. But if you start doing the dishes in the sink, it's quite likely that you will then feel inspired to go and do other activities and other things. And I think that's very, very relatable to writing a thesis and dissertation. Julie Gottman and John Gottman, they have 30 plus years of data on couples, and they talk about the masters of relationships and the disasters of relationships. And in particular, they talk about a 5-to-1 ratio where how you talk with one another, 5 positive comments will usually be the ratio of what is needed to take 1 negative comment and kind of make it so that negative comment isn't so strong and overwhelming. We have a negativity bias and we tend to prioritize and kind of hear the negative more. So if you are negative talking about your thesis or dissertation, try the 5-to-1 ratio. How can you say 5 positive things about your thesis and dissertation work to 1 of your negative comments or your complaints? Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert in A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind They just remind us about the power of focus and how we are happier even when we're doing tasks that we don't particularly like. We are happier in the moment when we're focusing on them. So even if you're not sitting down and having the most naturally inspired writing session, just know that it's going to be a happier writing session if you stay focused. And the last, and we're going to spend a little bit of time with Carol Dweck's notion of mindset through a couple other avenues, but in that new psychology of success mindset theory, Carol Dweck just really kind of brought forward data and evidence that if you are growth mindset oriented, that you will be able to navigate those difficult and moments and those challenges so much easier than with a fixed mindset. So I think with that notion, it's really helpful for us to return back to some of the language that we used to talk about our project and take a look at that and see that, think about it in a 5-to-1 ratio. And if there's kind of automatic negative thoughts about writing, how it is that we might be able to reframe them. And this is a handout that is free. I can give it out. You just need to email again for resources. But in this kind of changing, from instead of I can't do this, I will keep trying, there's a number of ways that we can reframe things to I'm afraid of making a mistake, or mistakes help me learn. I don't know how, I can learn how. This is too hard to, with more practice, it will get easier. I'm not good at this becomes how can I get better? They are better than I am, which is what can I learn from them? And I give up, or becomes I will try a different way. And you'll notice that on that right-hand side, where we have all of the reframings, these are great examples of how we can take something that may be an automatic thought of like, oh, comparison, right? They've written this so much better than I have. Or a colleague, they're so much better at this than I am, right? But think about it. Stop. What can I learn from them? And just step it back a little bit. You're here, you belong, you have an interest and perhaps even a love of your topic and project and research. So let's keep it growth oriented. Yeah. So reframing how we talk about our rating. This is the fifth question that we considered in the webinar. Keeping in mind the value of that challenge, right? Of that rock face and the pleasures. Can you reframe those challenges to being some sort of pleasure or new growth, new area of growth? I'm enjoying the challenge of, or I look forward to learning more about, or I appreciate when I better understand the limits of, right? So if you've bumped up against the limit, I appreciate knowing that that limit is there. I'll have to go and read more or learn more, right? And then thinking about writing resources to marshal to your cause. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. But I think one of the resources that we have are stories and accounts by other folks who have navigated the thesis and dissertation writing process successfully. Uh, this article by Benjamin Andrews, Success by Failure, was published in About Campus. It's largely for student affairs folks, but Ben Andrews guest spoke at CSU Writes retreats for a while and was at CSU for a while. And so I was ever grateful to get to know him and to hear and learn a little bit more about his story. And I actively encourage folks to read his article because it's such a wonderful sharing of what he learned by failing. He actually failed his exams and then having to reconsider and relearn in his field. And he says that maybe we can begin to think about ways to move toward conceptualizing success as putting oneself in a position to experience challenges that lead to growth and celebrating the steps of progress along the way, which is just a lovely sentiment for how it is that I think we write and we write healthfully. So here are some of my tips to stay inspired. A little bit like eat your vegetables, right? But set and maintain a regular writing schedule. 30 minutes to 2-3 hours a day, plenty. And it doesn't have to be every day, but it has to be regular enough that you're not losing sight of your project. And then build in plenty of guilt-free time so that you know that you still have a life, right? So you're still taking care of yourself and writing isn't taking over everything. And then seek out and participate in a positive writing community so that they can help you keep track of and meet your goals, that you can have positive reinforcement and support. Being accountable to others really does help you produce more and more regularly. There's tons of data on it. And it reduces feelings of isolation, and you can continue to practice your five positive comments to one negative. And it's really, really helpful if you begin to think of yourself as a writer as part of your profession. Researcher, teacher, writer, right? You can add on those professional roles, but as long as you are identifying as a writer, you are likely to show up for those writing sessions. It's like being a runner, right? Last one, after leaving this webinar, I want you to have listed off writing resources that can help support you through your process. Advisors, mentors, graduate student colleagues are great. Graduate school programs and staff also super helpful. Librarians, field network, AI also. AI should not be your only one. I'm concerned about people becoming increasingly isolated with that one. A final claim and a riff on Chris Sharma's the best way to stay in shape is not to get out of shape. And I give him credit for this because it's the first place I heard it. But the best way to get started and stay inspired about your thesis and dissertation is to write your thesis and dissertation. Or in other words, writing your thesis and dissertation will generate the inspiration to write your thesis and dissertation. Klein bottle, right? All right, and just some words of wisdom from Julie Jensen. She reminds us that in academic writing, what we really need to have is brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding encounters with projects that we enjoy. And so I think that's the perfect recipe for thesis and dissertation writing this semester. So I don't know what it looks like for you. It may look like some of this, but I think consistently it'll begin to feel much more inspiring. Remember, show up and write. So please reach out if you want to lead write for us. We'd be happy to have you. Fall sessions, again, they're posted on the CSU Writes website on the Show Up and Write page. And until we meet again, may your writing be brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding. Take care.